Hello, I hope you're having a great day wherever you are and whenever you are. Today I'm going to be wrapping up books 4 to 6 that I read this year, and all 3 of them happen to be trade paperback comics. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the first comic series that I ever started to read, and that is Hawkeye by Matt Fraction. This is volume 4, Rio Bravo, so it concludes the run that Matt Fraction did on this Hawkeye series. A new writer is now taken over, and I have volume 5 on my shelf, so I can't wait to get to that. I will say again, like I say every single time that I bring up this series on my channel, if you're trying to get into superhero comics, this is a really good one to start with because I found that it's just a lot more grounded. There's not a lot of fantasy elements going on, not a lot of sci-fi, because Clint is obviously a normal guy, he just has really, really good aim. And as well as that, he's not really dealing with like earth-shattering, end-of-the-world scenarios. This whole series is just about Clint defending his neighbourhood. So there's this building that's been bought by this gang of men that wear tracksuits, and they've been buying all of the buildings in the neighbourhood and they've been putting the prices up so that people get kicked out so that they can then sell those buildings to get profit. So along comes Hawkeye and he puts a spanner in the works, and the whole arc is just dealing with that one building. So it really isn't on a large scale. Clint as a character goes through so much growth in this series, and in especially this last one. What I think this series does really well is that it shows someone who has very low self-worth, and while a lot of the time that's quite funny because it has a self-deprecating sense of humour to it, it obviously does affect him in a bad way, and it affects all of the people around him as well. Because he has low self-worth, that kind of ekes out into all of his relationships and affects them. And everyone gets really frustrated that he won't ask for help, and because he is a superhero with no superpowers, I guess he kind of feels a little bit left behind in that sense. And so he wants to prove that he can do all of this on his own. But through the course of the story, he obviously comes to realise that he does need other people and learns and grows from that. In this volume we're introduced to Barney Barton, who is Clint's older brother. I really liked the character of Barney. He's kind of that lovable rogue, and their relationship is completely unhealthy and complicated, but it's somehow at the same time endearing, even though it seems to be centred around violence. Like, from Barney teaching Clint how to fight and how to defend himself, to stealing from each other, to betraying each other, it's all in there, but at the same time they're still brothers. Throughout the volume we get to see flashbacks from Clint and Barney's early life, and the way it's done is just so good because it always parallels what's happening in the present, and sometimes things that are set up in the flashbacks are paid off in a really satisfying way in the end. I will put out a trigger warning though for child abuse because that is quite a big part of Clint's childhood. I actually read this a second time before I did this review because I wanted to like refresh myself on it, and it was even better the second time around because you notice subtle things that you didn't notice the first time around, especially in the order of events, because Matt Fraction writes this in a way where it often jumps back and forwards between things, and I think the first time around reading it I didn't quite understand what events led to what, but now that I've read the whole series and I've gone back and read this one again, it became really, really clear and even more clever. And the end action sequence is so satisfying. Like, I've talked about Clint's story arc being really satisfying at the end, but the action is also paid off really well because we finally get to have that showdown with the tracksuit guys. Something that I thought was really clever in this volume was that unfortunately at one stage Clint actually goes deaf after a fight, and I just thought it was really clever the way that they showed this in the comic through the art, because they have like blank speech bubbles and they have the sign language in little boxes like this. So that's really interesting, like the way that they still manage to tell the story. I think what I love most about this series is Clint as a character because you can just, I don't know, he's just really relatable. He's probably the most relatable superhero because he is ordinary, and he does deal with this sense of low self-worth, and I've been there and I know people that have been there, so when I read about this character and the way that he is acting with the people around him, like I can see myself in him, but then I can also see myself in the other people around him that are getting frustrated and want to help him, but like he won't let them in, and it's just a really good portrayal of that situation. So all in all, absolutely amazing, incredible end to this series, and I give it 5 out of 5 stars. I'm probably not going to talk about the next two as much as I talked about that one, because that one is like my love and my everything. These two are really good, don't get me wrong, but they're not Hawkeye to me. So the next one I'm going to talk about is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 Cosmic Avengers by Brian Michael Bendis. Now I feel kind of bad because I really don't have much to say about this, even though I really enjoyed it at the time. I did a little bit of research and I think this comic came out just before the film, so it's kind of like a reintroduction to the characters, and you get a little bit of plot but it doesn't really go anywhere in that first volume. Basically what happens is Earth is sort of out of bounds. Unfortunately, someone doesn't get the memo and attacks Earth, so obviously the Guardians have to step in to protect it. If you've seen the films, you'll know who they are. And in this series they have one more addition, which is Tony Stark. So what sticks in my mind about this comic is that it really is an introduction to each of the characters, and it explores their backstories a little bit and kind of sets up questions that you really want answered about each of them. Like there's a mystery going on with Rocket, which is probably the thing that is making me want to read the rest of the series the most, because I really want to find out the answer to that. And something else that was quite interesting was that it gives us a backstory for Peter Quill that we don't get to see in the film. So it tells us more about his mum and dad and how he ended up in space. So I think overall this volume, as an introduction to the series, I think it's really good. It really helps someone come into it who's never read another Guardians of the Galaxy comic before, because it does introduce us to the comic version of the characters, and it also gives us a tiny hint at what we can expect from the rest of the series. So I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. And the final comic that I'm going to talk to you about is Descender Volume 1 Tin Stars by Jeff Lemire, who happens to be the person that's taken over the Hawkeye comics, so this is a really good sign for me because I really enjoyed Descender. This is set in a place where robots have been made illegal and they have all been shut down and destroyed until one day a robot called Tim-21 wakes up. The thing that I remember vividly from this comic is Tim-21, because he is absolutely adorable. He's a robot that's built like a child, and like a child he has a very trusting and naive attitude. So you kind of just want to protect him and keep him out of harm's way. It's all done in watercolours and it's drawn by Dustin Nguyen. And I think that's part of what is really appealing to this world, because usually when you think of robots you think of like hard edges, but with this style everything is obviously a lot more soft. And that goes perfectly with the story and the theme, because obviously robots have been made illegal, but you have Tim-21 who is so soft and gentle and kind that you just wonder why that is. One problem that I did have with it was that I found it a little bit hard to get into at first, but I put it down and I picked it up a few days later, and when I read it that time it went a lot more smoothly, so I'm not sure if I just wasn't in the mood that day or whether reading it once and then reading it again helped, but that did put me off at first. I'm really glad that I read it though, because it was really good and I definitely want to pick up the next volume when I can. In the end I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. So that's the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye!